The nation has a new Speaker of the House, and he's somebody already trusted by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I talked this week with NCBA's Vice President of Government Affairs, Ethan Lane, who said though Speaker Mike Johnson of Louisiana has not served on the Agriculture Committee, he has a strong voting record when it comes to agriculture. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Let's get into this week's AgNet Weekly. So we have finally a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson of Louisiana, and I wanted to get your take on how this may affect things. And to be honest, I don't know much about him. I think many people around the nation. I've been researching him for the last 24 hours and trying to get to know what he stands for and what he's about. What have you come across so far?
Well, so we have a long-standing relationship with Speaker Johnson. We've been supporters of Congressman Johnson for all of his time in the House of Representatives. Going back to before my time running this office, he's a very principled conservative, and when I say that, I mean sort of the older definition of that rather than sort of the newer populist meaning of conservative. He's very resolute in his view of those principles. He is for free markets. He is for individual liberty. He is for limited government, and those tend to be values that overlap very strongly with most cattle producers around the country, and certainly with NCBA's policy book. And because of that, we've been long supporters of Mr. Johnson's. He is going to bring a fresh perspective, I think, to these conversations, and I think it's evidenced by the vote that was sort of unexpected. That he was able to get a unanimity of the Republican conference in a time when there were a lot of proclamations that nobody could achieve that. That he does tick a lot of boxes for both conservatives and moderates in the House Republican Conference. We're hopeful that that's going to lead to a little bit of grace as he takes this role from those camps to allow him to navigate the looming shutdown and the expired farm bill, and some of these overseas conflicts that are before the chamber right now. He's going to need all the grace he can get from various camps to navigate those challenges, and he has a very short time frame to do that. We were encouraged to see that within hours of his swearing in yesterday, he was already processing appropriations bills on the House floor. And so it's nice to see them get back to work. And we're hopeful that they can get through that process and start engaging with the Senate to avert a shutdown in November.
Yeah, and he has said that, to expect a pretty busy schedule for them as he tries to get everything caught up that they've, haven't been able to do in the last 3 weeks as they have done this search. As you pointed out, he does fall in line quite a bit with, a lot of things that farmers and ranchers do stand for. I have not been able, I wasn't able to find his voting record on agricultural issues, but what can you tell me that he has stood for agriculture so far?
He has been a pretty reliable supporter of what agriculture has asked for. He's a guy who has voted for the Farm Bill. He's a guy who has voted for ag appropriations bills. I mean, he's been a supportive member of Congress for agriculture. He hasn't been on the ag committee. He hasn't been involved, in those conversations directly. But he's been a guy who has listened to the ag community and been supportive. And that's not a thing that you can say about everybody in Congress right now. So we're appreciative of that. He listens. He's a thinker. He's a constitutional scholar, and he likes detail. He likes to talk about the specifics, and that's something we always appreciate. There's nuance in these topics, and you like curious members that want to know the why and the how of these things.
And you brought up the Farm Bill earlier, and as you mentioned, the Farm Bill is expired. Do you think he'll be able to get a Farm Bill passed or to push forward to work on the Farm Bill before the end of the year? Or are we looking probably at an extension?
I think that we're looking at an extension. I think that's been the situation, and I think that we're just now hearing members of Congress be more public about acknowledging that, and that's fine. I think that the fact that we're going to be into November here by the end of the week and don't have text yet is sort of indicative of where we are in that process. That's not That's not anybody's fault. The committees have worked really hard, I think, on this process. They've covered a ton of ground out in the country talking to producers. But this is an incredibly difficult environment to pass a $1 trillion spending package. And I think that's evidenced by what we've seen in Congress over the last few weeks. I'm aware of, I think, a fairly extensive conversation in the House Republican Conference during those discussions with prospective speakers candidates from farm state Republicans, asking all of those candidates, are you going to get a farm bill done? Are you going to make sure that we prioritize this? And I know that was one of the things that now Speaker Johnson did commit to. That's not out of line with where he's been. So I would expect that he's going to look for the most expeditious route to getting that done. I don't think it's realistic to expect that to get done in the next 2 months. I think it is far more realistic that a year-end funding bill or another CR or whatever is put together by November 17th includes some type of extension that gets this pushed into next year with protections for those commodities that are going to be exposed without such an extension. And I think that needs to be the priority right now, and I think that's where most people's heads are at on the Hill at the moment.
Yeah. One thing that I did find is that Representative Johnson is not necessarily a supporter of climate science. And, as you know, the Biden administration is really pushing climate-smart agriculture and programs for that. Do you think that there will be some pushback now that we have that there's a bigger voice from Johnson on the Hill when it comes to climate science?
I'm not terribly concerned about that. I've seen all the same clips everybody has dug up, and I don't think he has said anything that's wildly different than what other members of the House Republican Conference have sort of said at various points in the last 10 years in this climate conversation. I think it's an evolving conversation like anything else. I think as agriculture has learned what an important role we play in that conversation and how beneficial we are in moving the needle in the right direction on climate, our own rhetoric and our own conversations about climate have changed, and I wouldn't expect anything different from members of Congress on Capitol Hill. I think that that ongoing conversation about making sure we have the resources needed in voluntary incentive-based ways to continue to move the needle in the right direction on sustainability in the cattle supply chain is one that I don't anticipate being derailed by this speakership. I think that Congressman Johnson, now Speaker Johnson, is a pragmatist, a realist in these conversations, and I have no doubt that he will be open to having those conversations. I don't view him as someone who's just going to slam the door on things that work because of a position on the word climate or anything in that space.
In comparing him to the former speaker, do you think that we'll see much differences when it comes to how quickly things get done or how bills are pushed through or anything like that, or do you think that it'll kind of be business as usual?
That's a good question. I think he's going to need some time to develop his own style. You think about the normal course to the speakership through the leadership ranks, years of watching others in leadership, run things in a different way, being involved in those leadership team conversations about how to move an issue forward on the floor. He's going to kind of have fresh eyes coming into this. I think that there's some real value and some benefit to that. He's also going to benefit from an established leadership team that has that institutional memory as well. So I'm hopeful that it'll generate some new ideas on how to bring the conference together and how to get some work done. Again, I'm biased. I think very highly of Congressman Johnson. I've spent some time around him. I'm excited to see what he's able to do in that chair.
And and it's good to hear from somebody who has spent a lot of time around him and who knows him and has more of insight into what he's about and what to expect. And with that, what do you think farmers and ranchers around the nation should be watching for, or what can we expect within the next few months?
Well, he and his team are going to be focused, I think, on the obvious business at hand, keeping the government open, making sure that we're showing up in an appropriate way in the world events happening overseas, and ensuring that we're getting business done at home and keeping the supply chains moving, keeping food on grocery store shelves. There are some fairly immediate needs that have been put on hold this fall. So I can't imagine there's going to be a lot of room for anything other than really blocking and tackling those core issues in front of him. And I think that's going to be the focus in the next few months.
Is there anything else that you think that our listeners should know, or anything else that you'd like to talk about?
I think that after weeks of hand-wringing over who might be Speaker of the House, we've landed on a new speaker that is a real win for cattle producers. That's a champion for the view of government's role in the everyday lives of Americans. That's very much in line with most of our membership around the country. So we're optimistic about this. We're excited about it, and we look forward to working with the new speaker and his team to get some things done.
Thank you once again to NCBA's Vice President of Government Affairs, Ethan Lane. That's this week's AgNet Weekly. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thanks for tuning in.